machines, right? Now let us move ahead. Let us try to understand the second terminology of this course title, which is machine, right? So first we will talk about what is a machine, and then we will try to understand, as you just saw in the previous slides, I am several times using this terminology mechanism. So what exactly is a mechanism? So let us try to understand the difference between a machine and a mechanism. So the general definition of a machine is simply that it is a combination of rigid bodies, right? So you have several elements, right? And that are connected in such a way that they are transferring motion, and at the same time they are generating some useful work as well, right? So that is the primary definition of a machine. Now then, what is the definition of a mechanism? So you can again define mechanism as a combination of a number of rigid bodies, and again these rigid bodies are connected in such a manner that the motion of one rigid body, it will produce a definite motion of the other rigid body, correct? So if you see here, there is a primary difference between machine and mechanism. So what is the primary difference between these two? That a machine, it will generate useful work also, right? A machine will generate useful work also, but if you consider the case of a mechanism, so the purpose of a mechanism is simply to transmit motion. That means a mechanism is never going to produce useful work, because that is not the purpose of a mechanism. The purpose of a mechanism is simply to transfer or modify motion. Now let us move ahead and let us see an alternative definition of machine. So what exactly is a machine now? Now you can simply define that a machine could be a single mechanism, or it could be a group of mechanisms that perform both the functions. That is, the first function is motion transfer and another function is generating useful work, right? So ultimately, if you see that machine is a subset of a mechanism is simply a subset of the machine, correct? So the purpose of mechanism is to simply transfer motion. However, the purpose of machine is to transfer motion and as well as generate some useful work, right? So now we will try to understand the difference between a machine and a mechanism using some examples. So let us go back to the example of an excavator, right? Now if you observe that this excavator, it is composed of several rigid bodies. Now let me just call the name of those rigid bodies. So one of the rigid body you can consider as this bucket, right? Another rigid body you can consider this arm, right? These two arms. Then another rigid body you can consider as these two hydraulic actuators, right? So now if you observe that if we simply consider this arrangement, that is this bucket, these two arms, right? And then these two hydraulic actuators, then this portion of this excavator, we can call this portion as a mechanism, right? Because if you see this, that the purpose of, right, this portion is simply to transfer motion, right, from, right, one junction, you can see from this junction to the bucket, correct? Now if this is the mechanism, then what is a machine? Now it's very simple. What you do, you just supply power to this machine using a set of engine. Then you can use a transmission system, let's say gearboxes, right, or clutches. Now as soon as you connect all this engine, transmission system, right, clutches, etc. to this portion of the excavator, then the entire arrangement, it will be called as a machine, right? Because now using this entire arrangement, you can actually perform some work, right? Maybe that work could be digging earth, or that work could be lifting, let's say, soil, right? So that is the difference between a mechanism and a machine. Now let us take a simple example of IC engine, right? Very simple example of IC engine, right? Now we know that the basic components of a IC engine are what? The basic components of a IC engine are, obviously there is a piston, correct? Now you see here, this is basically the crank, and then this is basically your connecting rod. If you say this is your connecting rod, right? And now what is happening? This crank is mounted over this crankshaft, right? So if you observe, if I simply consider this much portion of an IC engine, correct? This much portion, that means the piston, right? The connecting rod, right? The crank, and finally this arrangement it is enclosed in a cylinder. So if I consider only these four components of the IC engine, so these four components of the IC engine, they are going to constitute a mechanism, because if you observe, their purpose is simply transferring motion, right, from one junction, you can say from this piston to this crankshaft. That's it, right? Now what you do, right, now into this arrangement, if you connect this crankshaft, let's say with a flywheel, then a transmission system, then a clutch, and finally if you use this arrangement to deliver power to the wheels of a vehicle, then you can call this entire arrangement as a machine, right? So I hope like I am able to convey that what is the primary difference between a machine and a mechanic.